On the fields of the Great Patriotic War, not only a battle for the motherland unfolded, but also an unprecedented struggle for truth. In this struggle, alongside the soldiers, frontline cinematographers also participated. They became the eyes of history, capturing every moment, every breath, every shot. Their camera was not just a tool, but a witness that recorded events for posterity, risking their lives under bullets and shell fire. These people, with cameras in their hands, were on the front lines to preserve for us a living chronicle of those terrible years. Their work is not just a chronicle, it is a living memory that does not allow us to forget about the feat and the tragedy. Their contribution to history is invaluable, because they gave us the opportunity to see the war as it was, without embellishment or distortion. June 22, 1941. This day forever entered history as the beginning of the most terrible war. For frontline cameramen, it became the starting point of a new, unbearably difficult stage in their lives and work. The suddenness of Nazi Germany's attack plunged the country into chaos, and the newsreels of the first months of the war are a chronicle of retreat, confusion, but also incredible courage. Cameramen, who just yesterday were filming peaceful scenes, found themselves on the front lines, often without proper training for combat operations. Their tasks seemed impossible. To capture the rapidly changing situation as the front moved eastward with lightning speed, cameras, heavy, cumbersome, not adapted for shooting in conditions of constant movement and shelling, became their only weapon against oblivion. Imagine a cameraman with a movie camera weighing several kilograms, film, a tripod, surrounded by retreating troops, under continuous bombing and artillery fire, trying to catch what was happening in the frame. It was almost suicide. Organizing filming in these conditions was practically impossible. Communication with the center was absent, and the delivery of film and equipment turned into a real odyssey. The filmed materials had to be transported by passing trucks, on foot, and sometimes by hand, overcoming hundreds of kilometers along destroyed roads. Every meter of film was literally soaked in sweat and blood. It was then that the first, shocking in their truthfulness, shots appeared. Destroyed cities, endless columns of refugees, burning villages, faces of soldiers, full of fatigue and determination. For example, the first frontline newsreels included footage of the defense of the Brest fortress, although full-fledged filming there was practically impossible. But fragmentary evidence made it into the chronicle, or footage from near Smolensk, where cameramen captured fierce battles and the first attempts at counteroffensives. These fragments, painstakingly collected, became the first chronicle of the war, a testament to its cruelty and scale. They showed the country and the world what was happening, despite all attempts by censorship and propaganda to conceal the real state of affairs. These films, sent to Moscow, became the basis for newsreels that were supposed to boost the morale of the people. But at what cost were they obtained? Dozens of cameramen died or went missing in the first months of the war, never having managed to hand over their invaluable materials. Their names remained unknown, but their heroic work is forever inscribed in history. The chaos of the first months of the war showed. For a full documentary understanding of what was happening, a systemic approach was necessary. Filming could not be left to chance or the enthusiasm of individual cameramen. The price of each shot was too high, the information they carried was too important. And then, deep within the main political directorate of the Red Army, an understanding matured. The camera must become a weapon, just like a rifle or a cannon. It is a weapon capable of capturing a feat, exposing the enemy, and inspiring the people to fight. Thus, starting from the summer of 1941, specialized frontline film groups began to form. The idea was simple and brilliant. Small but highly effective units of documentary filmmakers were created for each army and each fleet. These groups consisted of experienced cameramen, their assistants, sound engineers, and technicians. They acted not haphazardly, but according to a clear plan, subordinate to a single center. This was a qualitatively new stage in the history of military newsreels. If previously cameramen often acted at their own risk, now they became part of a well-oiled war machine. Their work was regulated by directives that came down from above and determined the priorities of filming. These documents clearly stipulated what exactly needed to be filmed: heroic moments of battles, the courage of soldiers and officers, destroyed enemy equipment, life in the rear, the work of hospitals. But not only. An important task was to record the atrocities of the Nazis, the destruction they brought to our land. This was necessary for future tribunals, for shaping public opinion, for the world to see the true face of the enemy. One of the first such directives was the order to create frontline film groups at armies and fleets, issued in August 1941. It prescribed the immediate organization of such groups, supplying them with everything necessary and ensuring their uninterrupted work. This was a signal that the state had realized the full power of cinema as a tool of propaganda and historical record. For cameramen, these directives became a kind of combat manual. They not only indicated what to shoot, but also how to shoot, how to interact with the command staff, how to ensure the safety of film and equipment. The first methodological developments appeared, a kind of textbooks for frontline documentary filmmakers. They described filming techniques in combat conditions, camouflage methods, and rules of conduct on the front line. For example, it was recommended to shoot from cover, use natural terrain folds, and avoid open spaces. But these recommendations were often violated for the sake of a unique shot, in order to show the viewer the whole truth of the war. Cameramen understood. Their task was not just to record an event, but to convey its atmosphere, emotions, tension. And for this, sometimes they had to go to the brink of life and death. Frontline film groups became the eyes of the entire country. They were everywhere, at the front, in the rear, in partisan detachments, in the Navy, in aviation. Their work was round the clock, without days off or holidays. They filmed at any time of the year, in any weather, under shelling and bombing. And every frame, every second of film, was the result of their incredible courage and self-sacrifice. It is thanks to this systemic work, thanks to the creation of frontline film groups, that today we have such a rich and truthful cinematic heritage of the Great Patriotic War. This is not just a chronicle, it is living history, told by those who saw it with their own eyes and captured it for us, for future generations. A frontline cameraman, standing on the front lines, was not just a man with a camera. He was part of a complex system that required not only courage, but also a deep understanding of technology. After all, in wartime conditions, when every second counted and every frame could cost a life, equipment had to be as reliable as possible and adapted to harsh realities. The main working tools for most cameramen were IMO and KS-50 film cameras. The IMO, an American portable camera, became a true legend. Its compactness, reliability, and ease of use made it indispensable. Weighing about 2.5 kilograms, it allowed the cameraman to be mobile, quickly change position, and shoot handheld, which was critically important in the dynamics of combat. The camera operated on a spring mechanism, eliminating the need to carry heavy batteries. One wind was enough for about 20 seconds of shooting, which required incredible precision and the ability to capture the right moment from the cameraman. Film was loaded into 30-meter cassettes, and each such cassette was worth several lives, as it not only had to be shot, but also delivered to the editing room. The Soviet camera KS-50 was more massive and heavy, about 7 kilograms. It was intended for studio shooting, but in wartime it became a frontline camera. It was used on tripods, which limited mobility but allowed for a more stable image. The lenses were interchangeable, giving cameramen some flexibility in choosing angles. But cameras were not the only part of the arsenal. Cameramen carried a supply of film, hundreds of meters of it, which weighed a lot. Film cassettes, tripods, light filters, and sometimes even night vision devices. All this added to the baggage. And this was in addition to personal weapons, gas masks, dry rations, and everything else a soldier was supposed to carry. Imagine the weight a person had to carry, a person who also had to run, hide, and sometimes crawl under fire. Transporting this equipment was a separate task. Cameras, film, tripods. All this was packed into special boxes, often homemade, which had to protect the equipment from dirt, moisture, dust, and of course, from shrapnel. Cameramen moved on trucks, armored vehicles, on horses, and often on foot, covering dozens of kilometers over rough terrain. Each cassette with exposed film was carefully packed and sent to Moscow, often with passing vehicles or through liaisons. It was a true logistical feat. Protecting equipment in combat conditions was a paramount task. A camera is not just a piece of metal. It is eyes that capture history. Therefore, cameramen invented various methods of camouflage and protection. They wrapped cameras in tarpaulins, hid them in wooden boxes, and sometimes simply buried them in the ground to protect them from shelling. Servicing equipment on the front lines was extremely difficult. Dust, dirt, frost, heat. All this negatively affected the operation of mechanisms. Cameramen themselves, and sometimes with the help of assistants, cleaned, lubricated, and repaired their cameras right in the field. Sometimes, to save the film from freezing, they carried it under their greatcoats, warming it with their own body heat, and all this under continuous enemy fire. Often, cameramen worked in pairs. One would shoot, the other would cover, monitor the situation, and hand over the film. It was teamwork, where everyone was responsible for the life and results of the other. Technology and equipment were their extension, their weapon in the fight for truth. And what they were able to preserve for us, despite all the difficulties, is an invaluable testament to their feat. Among the thousands of nameless heroes with cameras were those whose names are forever inscribed in the annals of the Great Patriotic War in golden letters. Their talent, courage, and unique perspective on events made them not just cameramen, but true artists of war, whose works continue to evoke the deepest response to this day. One such titan was Roman Karmen. A legendary figure, he went through the entire war, from its first days to victory in Berlin. His movie camera saw the retreat of 41, the defense of Moscow, Stalingrad, and the capture of Berlin. Karmen was everywhere the fate of the country was being decided. His style was distinguished by incredible dynamism and the ability to capture the decisive moment. He was not afraid to go into the thick of events. His shots were full of tension, truth, and deep drama. Roman Karmen did not just record what was happening. He created cinematic canvases that became classics of documentary cinema. His mastery lay in his ability to show not only the external side of war, but also the inner world of man, his experiences, his resilience. Vladislav Mikosha is another name that has become a symbol of Frontline cinema chronicles. His specialization, if one can call it that, was the Navy. He was one of those who captured the heroic defense of Sevastopol, naval battles, and the life of submariners. Mikosha possessed a unique gift for seeing beauty, even in the most terrifying scenes of war. His shots from the sea, taken in incredible conditions, amaze with their aesthetics, and at the same time convey all the tragedy and heroism of naval warfare. He knew how to show the greatness of the human spirit against the backdrop of the boundless water element and the destructive power of warships. But among the galaxy of frontline cameramen, there were not only men. Maria Sukhova is one of the few women who, with a film camera in hand, went through all the trials of war. Her works often differed with a special, deeper attention to the details of everyday life at the front, to the destinies of ordinary people, women, and children caught in the whirlwind of war. She filmed in hospitals, in liberated villages, showing the face of war from a completely different side. through the prism of human suffering and unwavering hope. Her shots were poignant and sincere. They spoke of the price of victory without unnecessary words. Each of these cameramen, and many others whose names, unfortunately, remained less known, brought their individual style, their unique vision, into the general mosaic of military cinema chronicles. Some specialized in filming artillery battles, trying to convey the power and destructiveness of fire as much as possible. Others preferred to film aviation, risking their lives soaring into the sky with pilots to capture aerial battles. There were also those who focused on working in partisan detachments, creating unique testimonies of the people's struggle in the enemy's rear. Their personal exploits were inseparable from their professional activities. They did not just film, they lived the war, breathed it, and every shot was imbued with their courage and selflessness. They crawled under bullets, froze in trenches, starved with soldiers so that their cameras could continue to work. And it is precisely thanks to their incredible resilience and devotion to their work that we today have the opportunity to see the war as it was. Unretouched, unembellished, in all its terrifying truth and the grandeur of the feat. In a war where death lurked at every turn, Frontline cinematographers found themselves in a unique position. Their task, to capture the reality of battle, demanded incredible courage, composure, and, more often than not, the violation of all conceivable safety rules. Operators went into battle not with a rifle, but with a camera. And their goal was not the enemy, but a unique shot that could become part of a larger history. They understood that without their work, without these invaluable testimonies, many heroic moments or tragic events could be forgotten. That is why they risked, embarking on the most daring adventures to capture the true picture of what was happening through their lens. Filming positions were chosen not based on safety, but on the principle of the best angle. Operators tried to be as close as possible to the epicenter of events, to capture the faces of the fighters, the details of attacks, the power of artillery salvos. This meant crawling on their bellies next to attacking soldiers, hiding in shell craters, filming from behind disabled tanks or ruined buildings. Sometimes they climbed to high ground, from which they had a view of the battlefield, becoming an easy target for enemy snipers. But the desire to get that very shot, one that sent shivers down the spine, often outweighed the instinct of self-preservation. Interaction with the fighters was a key aspect of their work. Operators were not detached observers, but part of the combat unit. They lived in the same trenches, ate from the same mess kit, and shared all the hardships of frontline life. This trust allowed them to capture genuine emotions without posturing. Soldiers became accustomed to the operator's presence, stopped paying attention to the camera, which made it possible to capture unadulterated truth. Often, the fighters themselves pointed out interesting moments, warned of danger, and covered the operators during filming. It was a kind of brotherhood, united by a common goal: victory. Camouflage was vital. The camera, especially on a bright sunny day, could glare, attracting the enemy's attention. Operators wrapped cameras in canvas, camouflaged them with branches, dirt, to blend in with the surrounding terrain. They themselves wore ordinary soldiers' uniforms, without any identifying marks, so as not to stand out from the crowd and not become a priority target. Sometimes they had to lie in ambush for hours, waiting for the right moment, remaining unnoticed. Safety regulations, so often discussed in instructions, often proved irrelevant at the front. How can one maintain a safe distance from an explosion when your goal is to capture its power? How can one avoid shelling when it is precisely under shelling that the whole drama of war unfolds? Operators often violated these rules, taking conscious risks. They knew that each such risk could cost a life, but they believed that their work was more important. Many of them were wounded, and some even died, without having time to hand over their invaluable films. In practice, their own methods of survival were developed. The ability to quickly assess the situation, anticipate the actions of the enemy and their own troops, find cover in the most unexpected places. All this came with experience. Operators learned to move silently, to be inconspicuous, to become part of the landscape. They mastered first aid skills, knew how to handle weapons, although their primary weapon remained the camera. Survival often depended on intuition, reaction speed, and of course, luck. The specifics of video recording various types of combat operations were notably different. Filming an offensive required maximum mobility. The operator had to keep up with the attackers, not fall behind, not lose sight of the main events. In defense, on the contrary, one could take a more stationary position. But then one had to remain under fire longer, waiting for moments to shoot. Urban battles were among the most difficult. Constant ambushes, snipers, shelling from every window. Operators filmed street battles, building assaults, hand-to-hand combat, trying to convey all the dynamics and brutality of street fighting. Filming aerial battles required special courage and technical skills. Operators ascended into the sky with pilots, installing cameras on the wings of aircraft, or filming from the cockpit. Underwater footage, though rarer, also took place, capturing the life and work of submariners. Each type of combat action placed its own demands on the operator, but one thing remained constant: the need to be in the thick of events to capture the truth of war for future generations. Amidst the chaos and destruction brought by war, one place became a symbol of inhuman resilience and unparalleled courage: Leningrad. The city on the Neva, gripped by the blockade, transformed into an arena of unprecedented drama, which Frontline cameramen captured with astonishing precision and pain. Their work here, under conditions of hunger, cold, and constant bombardments, became a unique testament to the human spirit, unbroken by the enemy. This was not just filming, but a struggle for every frame, for every second of life, in the literal sense of the word. The Leningrad film crew was formed at the beginning of the war, but it was with the onset of the blockade that their work acquired special significance. These people, many of whom were residents of the city themselves, endured all the hardships of blockade life along with everyone else. They didn't just film. They lived in conditions where death was a constant companion, where every day was a struggle for survival. Their cameras became an extension of their eyes, and the film, a memory of inhuman trials. They worked in conditions that today seem inconceivable. Temperatures in unheated rooms dropped to -20 to -30 degrees Celsius. The film became brittle, and equipment froze. Operators carried film under their clothes, warming it with their own bodies so that it wouldn't break during filming. Hunger was a constant companion. Cinematographers, like all Leningraders, received meager rations, but their work demanded colossal physical and emotional effort. Many of them suffered from dystrophy, but continued to film, understanding that every shot taken was a contribution to the future victory. Bombardments and artillery shelling were commonplace. Operators filmed under fire, risking their lives to capture the destruction. Fires, the work of anti-aircraft gunners, and the resilience of the residents. They rushed to the site of bomb impacts to capture the consequences before they were cleared or extinguished. It was a race against time and death. The footage shot by Leningrad operators became invaluable historical documents. They showed the daily life of the besieged city. Bread queues, exhausted but unyielding people. Leningraders working in factories despite hunger and cold. Children playing in snowy streets despite bombings. Operators captured the construction of defensive structures, the work of hospitals, and the performances of artists in the besieged city. They filmed the road of life, the only thread connecting Leningrad with the mainland, through which food was delivered and people were evacuated. These frames are full of tragedy, but at the same time, they show the incredible strength of spirit of the Leningraders, their faith in victory. Among the operators who worked in besieged Leningrad were names such as Yevgeny Uchitel, Anatoly Pogorely, Semyon Shkolnikov, Oleg Bryantsevich. Each of them contributed to the creation of this unique film chronicle. Their works formed the basis of many documentaries that have become classics of world cinema. These frames are not just a chronicle. They are a living memory of those who endured, who did not give up, who gave us the opportunity to live. This is not just history. It is a lesson in courage and resilience that we have no right to forget. After the inhuman trials of besieged Leningrad, Frontline cinematographers found themselves in the epicenter of yet another, perhaps the most fierce and bloody battle of the Great Patriotic War, the Battle of Stalingrad. Here, on the banks of the Volga, the fate of not only the city, but of the entire war was being decided. And the filmmakers, cameras in hand, were there to capture every moment of this titanic confrontation. This was a battle they didn't just film, they lived it, breathed its fire and pain. Stalingrad was not just a city, it was hell on earth, where every house, every street became a fortress, where battles raged for every floor, every brick. Filming in such conditions was incredibly difficult. Total destruction, continuous fighting, constant bombardments and artillery shelling turned every operator's trip to a position into an act of heroism. The city's landscape changed hourly. Yesterday's buildings turned into piles of rubble. Streets were covered with craters, and the air was filled with smoke and dust. In this chaos, one had to not only survive, but also manage to capture the most important moments in the lens. Operators worked literally under fire, crawling on their bellies among the ruins, hiding in basements and dilapidated buildings to get unique shots. They filmed snipers in ambushes, assault groups advancing through smoke and fire, the work of artillerymen covering crossings over the Volga. Every second of film was worth its weight in gold. For example, the legendary footage capturing the battles for Mamayev-Kurgan became a symbol of the unbreakable will of Soviet soldiers. Operators ascended its slopes alongside the infantry, risking their lives to show the height for which such a fierce struggle was waged. Urban filming had its own peculiarities. Narrow streets, destroyed houses, the constant threat of sniper fire and sudden enemy attacks demanded not only skill, but also incredible intuition from the operators. They learned to anticipate the development of events, to choose positions that would provide maximum overview while ensuring some protection. Often, they had to shoot from behind barricades, through breaches in walls, from under debris, to remain unnoticed and not become a target. Among those who worked in Stalingrad were such renowned cinematographers as Roman Karmen, Vladimir Sushchinsky, and Ivan Gutkin. Their names are forever linked to the cinematic chronicle of this great battle. Karmen, for example, shot unique footage of the preparations for the counteroffensive, the advance of Soviet troops, and the encirclement of Paulus's Sixth Army. His lens captured the faces of soldiers, full of fatigue but also immense determination. Moments of attack, moments of rest when soldiers shared their last piece of bread. Sushchinsky, in turn, created poignant footage about the lives of civilians in the besieged city, about the work of hospitals, about those who remained in Stalingrad until the very end. He showed how people continued to live and fight in conditions that seemed unbearable. Gutkin focused on filming street battles, capturing every detail of this meat grinder, every shot, every explosion. His works became vivid evidence of the brutality and ruthlessness of urban warfare. The unique footage shot in Stalingrad became not just documents, they became part of world history, capturing the turning point of the war. It was here, on the banks of the Volga, that the backbone of Nazi Germany was broken, and the operators were there to show it to the world. They filmed the capture of Paulus, the rout of German units, the jubilation of Soviet soldiers after the victory. These shots became a symbol of resilience, courage, and the inevitability of victory. They proved that even in the most brutal hell, the human spirit can endure and win. Every meter of film shot in Stalingrad is a living testament to heroism. It is the voice of those who fought and won. Footage from the front, steeped in gunpowder and blood, was only half the battle. For these shots to become the voice of truth, to reach millions of viewers, they had a long and difficult path ahead, from film to screen. This was an entire industry working under wartime conditions, where each stage, logistics, editing, voiceover, and distribution, required incredible effort and dedication. After filming on the front lines, each film cassette became precious cargo. Operators, and often specially assigned liaisons, delivered it to the nearest collection points. These could be field headquarters, airfields, or railway stations. The film was transported by passing cars, trains, planes, and sometimes by river. The main goal was to deliver it to Moscow, to the Central Documentary Film Studio, as quickly and safely as possible. The road was full of dangers, shelling, bombings, sabotage groups. But everyone understood that without these shots, there would be no history, no truth. In Moscow, at the studio, the footage was met by editors. These were true masters of their craft, capable of creating a coherent and emotionally powerful work from disparate fragments. They worked around the clock, in several shifts. Film arrived from different fronts, from different operators, and the task was not just to splice frames together, but to give them meaning, to build a dramatic narrative, to emphasize heroism or tragedy. The editors selected the most expressive moments, cut out defects, and created the rhythm of the narration. Their work was no less important than the work of the operators on the front lines, because it was they who shaped the final message. After editing came the voiceover. A text was written for each film story, which was meant not only to inform but also to inspire and maintain morale. Announcers, whose voices were known throughout the country, voiced the chronicle, giving it additional emotional depth. Musical accompaniment also played a huge role, enhancing the drama or, conversely, the solemnity of the moment. All this work was done under strict secrecy and tight deadlines, because news from the front had to be as prompt as possible. And so, when the film story was ready, the stage of its distribution began. The main channels for informing the population and maintaining morale were the newsreels Soyuz Kino's Journal and News of the Day. These journals were released regularly, sometimes several times a week, and were shown before every screening in cinemas, clubs, enterprises, and hospitals. They were a window into the world of war for those in the rear, and a source of information for soldiers on the front lines when they had the opportunity to watch the chronicle. Soyuz Kino's Journal was the main mouthpiece that conveyed to the people information about the course of hostilities, about the exploits of soldiers and home front workers, about life in liberated cities. It showed not only victories, but also the difficulties the country faced, calling for unity and self-sacrifice. News of the Day, in turn, was more operational, consisting of short releases with the latest events from the front. The role of these newsreels during the war cannot be overestimated. They did not just inform, they shaped public opinion, strengthened faith in victory, and exposed enemy propaganda. Millions of people, holding their breath, watched footage shot by frontline operators, saw the faces of their sons, husbands, fathers, fighting on the front lines. These films were a powerful weapon in the ideological war, showing the whole world the resilience of the Soviet people and the inevitability of their victory. Thus, the path of military newsreels, from filming under bullets to screening, was a complex but vital process. Each stage required the highest professionalism and dedication, so that the voice of truth about the war would be heard and remain forever in the memory of generations. And what about women? How actively did they participate in this process? And what was their role in the war's film chronicle? Against the backdrop of men's stories, amidst the roar of cannons and the whistle of bullets, Where a camera in a soldier's hands was a common sight, only a few know about the women who also bore the weight of camera equipment. They, like invisible heroines, with a special gaze and a unique approach, captured the war, bringing their own, at times incredibly poignant notes to this harsh chronicle. This was predominantly a male profession, especially during wartime, and women had to overcome double difficulties. Not only the mortal danger of the front, but also skepticism, and sometimes outright rejection from male colleagues. However, their steadfastness and talent proved stronger than any prejudices. Among these brave women were Valentina Smirnova, Maria Sukhova, Elizaveta Svilova, and Nina Svishcheva, who wrote history with their cameras. They did not rush to the front lines to film assault teams or tank attacks, although such shots also appeared in their archives. Their gaze was directed at other aspects of the war, no less important, but often remaining off-screen for male cameramen. Female cameramen, with particular sensitivity, recorded life in the rear, the work of hospitals, the suffering and hopes of the civilian population. Their lenses captured moments that might seem insignificant against the backdrop of grand battles, but it was precisely these that revealed the full depth of human tragedy and the strength of spirit. They filmed bread lines in besieged Leningrad, the faces of children evacuated from destroyed cities, the work of women in factories who replaced men who had gone to the front. These shots were filled with compassion, pain, and a deep understanding that war is not only battles, but also daily survival and the struggle to preserve humanity. In hospitals, they spent hours capturing the work of nurses and doctors, the faces of wounded soldiers, their courage and hope for recovery. Shots taken by female cameramen often differed in intimacy and psychological depth. They allowed the viewer to penetrate the most hidden corners of the human soul, to see the war through the eyes of those who did not hold weapons but fought for life every day. They were a kind of chroniclers of the social side of the war, creating invaluable stories that today help us understand how the people endured those terrible years. The difficulties they faced were enormous. In addition to having to carry heavy equipment, work in conditions of cold, hunger, and constant danger, they also had to prove their right to be at the front. Nevertheless, their contribution to creating socially significant stories about the home front and hospitals is invaluable. They showed that war is not only heroism on the battlefield, but also the invisible, yet no less important, feat of those who waited, healed, and worked in the rear. Their works became an important part of the film chronicle of the Great Patriotic War, filling gaps that might have gone unnoticed without their sensitive and insightful gaze. By 1944, the situation on the fronts had drastically changed. While in the first years of the war, Soviet troops were retreating and fighting defensive battles, now the initiative had fully passed into their hands. The Great Liberation Campaign began, which was to culminate in Berlin. For frontline cinematographers, this meant not only a change of scenery, but also a fundamental shift in the nature of filming. From documenting the heroism of retreat and the steadfastness of defense, they moved to chronicling the triumphant offensive, the liberation of cities and countries in Europe. This was a new horizon, new tasks, and of course, new challenges. Soviet cinematographers marched at the vanguard of advancing troops, capturing every step of the Red Army on its path to victory. They filmed the liberation of Warsaw, Budapest, Vienna, Prague. Their lenses caught the joyful faces of residents welcoming Soviet soldiers as liberators. The ruined cities, symbolizing the brutality of fascist occupation. And of course, the unparalleled courage of the fighters who, at the cost of their lives, brought freedom to the peoples of Europe. The nature of the filming became more dynamic, more large-scale. From localized trench warfare, they moved to panoramic shots of massive military operations, swift breakthroughs, river crossings, and the capture of major cities. The international significance of Soviet military newsreels during this period became especially evident. The footage, shot by our cinematographers, conveyed the truth about the war to the world, exposed fascist propaganda, and showed the true face of the aggressor. These materials became invaluable testimonies for future generations, proof of the heroism and self-sacrifice of the Soviet people. They were shown in cinemas worldwide, shaping public opinion and strengthening the anti-fascist coalition. A special place during this period was occupied by interaction with Allied cinematographers. With the approaching victory and the meeting of Allied forces on the Elbe, Soviet and American, British, French documentary filmmakers began to work side by side. They exchanged experiences, shared footage, creating a common cinematic chronicle of the liberation of Europe. These meetings were not just professional contacts, but also a symbol of unity in the fight against a common enemy. For example, when Soviet troops liberated concentration camps such as Auschwitz or Majdanek, their cinematographers were the first to record the horrifying evidence of Nazi crimes. This footage, shot with incredible pain and shock, was then passed on to the Allies so that the whole world would learn about the scale of the tragedy. They became one of the main pieces of evidence at the Nuremberg trials. The change in the nature of filming required new skills from the cinematographers. Now they had to work not only in combat conditions, but also in the conditions of peaceful cities liberated from occupation. They filmed the restoration of destroyed objects, the life of the civilian population, and the establishment of peaceful life. These were frames of hope, revival, and faith in the future. However, despite all these changes, the danger for the cinematographers remained the same. The war was not yet over, and every shot was still obtained at the cost of incredible risk. Bullets and shrapnel continued to whistle, and the enemy, retreating, put up fierce resistance. But these people, with cameras in hand, continued their journey, understanding that their work was not just recording events, it was creating living history that would forever remain in humanity's memory. Their contribution to the liberation of Europe was invaluable, for they gave the world the opportunity to see how victory was forged, how nations rose from the ashes, and how long-awaited freedom arrived. Finally, 1945 arrived, the year that was to put an end to humanity's bloodiest war. For Frontline cameramen, this time became the culmination of all their work, the peak of their feat. Ahead was Berlin, the enemy's lair, a symbol of Nazi Germany's power, which was now destined to fall. And the filmmakers, cameras at the ready, were prepared to capture this historic moment, despite the final battles proving to be among the most ferocious and bloody. Filming the capture of Berlin was not just about documenting events. It was about creating a living legend that was meant to tell future generations about the price of victory. The Berlin operation was grandiose in its scale and intensity. Every block, every house, every street turned into a battlefield. Cameramen moved with assault groups, crawled on their bellies under heavy fire, climbed onto the roofs of ruined buildings to capture the panorama of the burning city through their lenses. They filmed street battles, sniper work, armored personnel carriers breaking through barricades, and the faces of soldiers on which weariness, determination, and the anticipation of imminent victory were etched. The difficulties of the final battles were incredible. Every second of filming was fraught with mortal risk. Snipers, Panzerfaust operators, desperately resisting garrisons. All this made the cameramen's work a true feat, but they understood the importance of historically documenting key moments. Without their footage, there would not be that authentic, undistorted truth about the capture of Berlin that we know today. The most iconic and, perhaps, the most famous shot of the end of the war was the hoisting of the victory banner over the Reichstag. This scene, which became a symbol of the end of the war, was filmed by several cameramen. Among them was Roman Karmen, who despite all the danger managed to climb onto the roof of the Reichstag and capture this epical moment. His footage, shot from an incredible height, showed the whole world that the enemy was defeated, and victory was ours. But not only the fact of the hoisting itself was important. The cameramen also filmed the events preceding this moment. Fierce battles for the Reichstag building, the advance of Soviet soldiers through its ruined halls, the installation of banners on different parts of the building, until finally the main banner was hoisted. These shots were full of drama, tension, and incredible symbolism. Another key moment captured by the Frontline cameramen was the signing of the Act of Germany's surrender. This historic ceremony, held in Karlshorst, was filmed by numerous cameras. The cameramen were positioned so as to capture every detail: the faces of the representatives of the Allied powers, the expressions of the German generals, the very moment of signing the document that ended the war in Europe. These shots became documentary evidence of the final defeat of Nazi Germany. They carried not only historical value, but also deep moral significance, showing the triumph of justice over evil. Among those who filmed these moments were not only Soviet cameramen, but also their allies, which underscored the international significance of the victory. The stories behind the creation of the most iconic shots of the end of the war are full of heroism and self-sacrifice. Cameramen such as Roman Karmen, Vladimir Sushchinsky, Ivan Gutkin risked their lives to capture these moments through their lenses. They didn't just press the camera button. They lived through every moment, understanding that their work was not just a report, but the creation of eternal memory. Some of them were wounded. Many endured incredible trials, but their cameras continued to work. It is thanks to their courage and professionalism that today we can see these shots, which still evoke the deepest emotions and remind us of the great price of victory. These film documents are an invaluable legacy that forever captured the triumph of good over evil, courage over despair, life over death. They became not just a chronicle, but a living testament to how victory was forged, how nations united to stop the most terrible threat to humanity. And every shot taken in those days is a tribute to those who gave their lives for a peaceful sky above our heads. Behind every meter of film, behind every unique frame capturing the harsh truth of war, stood a man with a camera, a man who risked his life so that history would not be forgotten. And this price, the price of a frame, proved to be exorbitantly high for many. Frontline cameramen, despite their non-combatant status, were on the front lines, often even closer to the enemy than infantrymen, because their task required maximum proximity to events. Therefore, their losses were comparable to the losses among soldiers of the most dangerous military specialties. According to official data, during the Great Patriotic War, 258 cinematographers, assistants, and sound engineers died or went missing. This is almost a third of the total number of those who worked at the front. Another 154 people were wounded or shell-shocked. The numbers speak for themselves. The profession of a frontline documentary filmmaker was one of the most dangerous in the war. To understand the scale of these losses, it is enough to compare them with losses, for example, among fighter pilots or tank crews. Of course, these comparisons are always conditional, but they give an idea of how high the risk was. Operators had no armor, could not fight back against the enemy. Their only weapon was a camera which, alas, did not protect against bullets and shrapnel. They were targets, because for the enemy, any recording of his actions was undesirable. Often, snipers purposefully hunted for the man with the film camera. Among the dead and wounded were both experienced masters and young men just starting their careers in cinema. Each of them is a separate story, a separate tragedy. For example, cameraman Mikhail Schneiderov died in 1942 near Leningrad, filming the battles for the Nevsky Pyatakchok. His camera was found next to his body, and the film, miraculously preserved, contained the last invaluable frames. Or cameraman Ivan Belyakov, who died in 1943 during the Battle of Kursk, filming a tank battle. His last frames were moments of fierce combat, captured literally seconds before a shell exploded near his position. These frames became part of a newsreel, but he himself never saw them. There were also those whose works remained unfinished, whose films were never found. Cameraman Aaron Suketsky went missing at the beginning of the war, and it is still unknown what happened to him and his footage. Perhaps his films lie somewhere on the battlefields, preserving untold stories. The fate of the preserved and lost materials of the deceased operators is a separate, extremely important topic. Many films obtained at the cost of life were lost in the chaos of war, burned in fires or buried under rubble. But those that were saved became an invaluable asset, the basis for many documentaries. These frames, sometimes battered, sometimes blurry, carry not only historical, but also immense emotional value. They are a living testament to heroism, a reminder that behind every frame stood someone's life. And every time we watch war chronicles, we must remember those who gave us this opportunity, those who paid the highest price for it. But even after the last salvos died down, after the victory banner was hoisted over the Reichstag, the work of Frontline cameramen did not end. Their invaluable labor, obtained at the cost of incredible effort and sacrifice, was only just beginning its true journey. The legacy of these brave filmmakers is not just kilometers of film. It is the foundation upon which our understanding of the Great Patriotic War, its scale, its heroes, and its tragedies was built. It was precisely on the basis of this Frontline newsreel that the greatest documentary films were created, becoming classics of world cinema and living monuments to those terrible years. One of the first and most powerful was the film Moscow Strikes Back, released in 1942. This film, directed by Leonid Varlamov and Ilya Kopalin, was a real breakthrough. It not only showed the events of the battle for the capital, but also, thanks to skillful editing and dramatic narration, conveyed all the tension, all the heroism of those days. Shots of icy fields, snow-covered trenches, desperate attacks, and finally, the routed enemy became a symbol of the indomitable Soviet spirit. The film received an Academy Award in 1943 for Best Documentary Feature, becoming the first Soviet film to be honored with such an award. This was international recognition not only of the talent of Soviet filmmakers, but also of the truthfulness of their chronicles. Other masterpieces followed, each woven from thousands of frames shot on the front lines. Stalingrad, a film released in 1943, became the visual embodiment of one of the bloodiest battles in human history. The cameramen who worked in Stalingrad did not just record events, they lived in hell, and their films conveyed this atmosphere with incredible power. The film showed not only the scale of the battles, but also the unparalleled courage of the city's defenders, their resilience, and their will to win. Shots of the ruined city, of battles for every house, for every street, became a symbol of the indomitable spirit of the Soviet people. The culmination of this series was the film Berlin, released in 1945. This film, shot by a whole galaxy of cameramen who had been through the entire war, became the final chord in the cinematic chronicle of the Great Patriotic War. It captured the storming of Berlin, the hoisting of the victory banner over the Reichstag, and the signing of the Act of Surrender. Berlin is not just a chronicle, it is a triumph, it is jubilation, it is tears of joy and sorrow for the fallen. It showed the whole world the price at which victory was won. But filmmaking was only part of the work. No less important was the history of preserving and systematizing these invaluable war film materials. Thousands of kilometers of film, shot on all fronts, required careful handling, cataloging, and storage. Immediately after the war, extensive work began on creating the State Central Archive of Film and Photo Documents, where all these materials flowed. Every reel, every cassette, was meticulously described, classified by filming location, date, and events. This was a titanic effort, thanks to which we today have access to this unique collection. The significance of these archives for world history and cinema cannot be overstated. They are not just a source of information, but also a living testament to an era, irrefutable proof of events that forever changed the world. These materials are used by historians, filmmakers, and journalists worldwide to study the war, to create new documentaries, and to preserve historical memory. They have become the basis for thousands of scientific papers, hundreds of films and television programs. It is thanks to the Frontline cameramen and their legacy that we can see the war as it was, without embellishment or distortion. These frames are our common lesson, our reminder of what war is and what price peace comes at. And their relevance today, amidst attempts to rewrite history, only becomes sharper. The legacy of Frontline cameramen, those who, under bullets and artillery fire, captured every moment of the Great Patriotic War, is not simply stored in archives. It lives, breathes, and even today, many decades later, remains incredibly relevant. In a world where history sometimes becomes a battlefield for minds, where attempts to falsify the past multiply, military newsreels are an unshakable bastion of truth, a unique document that resists any distortions. They don't just tell, they show how everything really was. It is this undeniable authenticity that makes the footage of Frontline cameramen an invaluable resource for preserving historical memory. They are not just black and white pictures. They are living testimonies, imprints of time, made by those who saw the war with their own eyes, and sometimes paid the highest price for these shots. The modern significance of their work is difficult to overestimate. First and foremost, it is a powerful tool in education. No, not even the most detailed textbook can convey the full depth and drama of war as a 10-minute excerpt of authentic newsreel footage can. The faces of soldiers, their emotions, destroyed cities, the work of medics, all this creates an immersive effect that cannot be achieved by other means. School children and students, seeing these shots, do not just memorize facts, they become imbued with the spirit of that time, realizing the scale of the tragedy and the greatness of the feat. These materials are used in history lessons, thematic lectures, and online courses, helping to form a deep and conscious attitude towards their country's past in the younger generation. Museum affairs also actively utilize the legacy of Frontline cameramen. Visual images captured on film become central exhibits of exhibitions dedicated to the Great Patriotic War. Interactive installations, multimedia presentations, virtual tours of battlefields. All this is impossible to imagine without authentic newsreels. They allow museum visitors not just to look at artifacts, but to see how these artifacts were used, how life and struggle looked in those years. Footage depicting Frontline cameramen, their equipment, and filming locations are themselves valuable exhibits, telling of the feat of those who, risking their lives, created this visual chronicle. Furthermore, military newsreels form the basis for countless modern documentary projects. Directors, historians, and publicists constantly turn to these archives to create new films, series, TV programs, and podcasts. These materials allow not only to recreate the atmosphere of those years, but also to conduct a deep analysis of events, show little-known facts, and tell about the fates of people. Military newsreels serve as an inexhaustible source of inspiration and information, allowing for the creation of projects that continue to educate and touch the hearts of viewers around the world. Reflections on the uniqueness of military newsreels as a document that resists historical falsifications acquire particular significance today. In the era of post-truth, when any information can be questioned, authentic footage shot on the front line becomes absolute proof. It cannot be faked. It cannot be distorted. It is a living testimony that speaks for itself. These shots do not just show events. They convey emotions, atmosphere, and experiences. They allow us to feel part of those events, to understand what people who lived in that terrible time felt. This is not just history, It is our common lesson, our reminder of what war is and what price peace comes at. And their relevance today, in the face of attempts to rewrite history, only becomes sharper, because they are an unshakable shield against oblivion and lies.